The air in the grand clearing didn't just hold the scent of pine and earth, it held the weight of an ending. Moonlight, cold and unforgiving, painted the faces of the entire Silverfang pack in shades of silver and sorrow. They were gathered for a coronation, but for me, Alara, it felt like a public execution of my own heart. Every breath I took tasted like ash. My fingers twisted the simple leather cord around my neck, the only thing left of the promises he'd made. Alpha King Kael stood at the stone dais, a figure of impossible power, his broad shoulders blocking the ceremonial fires like a mountain eclipsing the sun. Once, the sight of him had made my soul hum with a belonging so deep it felt ancient. Now, the space between us was a frozen wasteland. He had asked for space, just a little time, he'd said, to shoulder the crushing burden of the crown alone, and I, loving him with a devotion that was my very breath, had granted it. I'd stepped back. I'd become a whisper in his court, a shadow in his halls, believing that true love was a patient guardian. How foolish I had been! I had mistaken my silence for strength and his distance for duty. The pack's murmuring died as Kael raised a hand. His voice, a sound that once spun dreams in my deepest sleep, now felt like shards of ice falling upon my skin. "My loyal pack," he began, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, over me as if I were a stranger, a ghost he had already forgotten. "Tonight, we secure our legacy. Tonight, we embrace a new era of unwavering strength." My heart was a frantic, trapped bird beating against my ribs. This was the moment where a part of me, the foolish, hopeful part, still prayed he would turn, would see me, would remember. He moved, but not towards me. He extended his hand towards the edge of the clearing, where the shadows seemed to gather and pulse. A figure emerged. The firelight caught her, and a collective, awed gasp rippled through the pack. Celine. Her hair was a river of midnight, her eyes like polished onyx, and her scent, a cloying foreign perfume of night-blooming jasmine and raw power, cut through the familiar forest smells. It clung to Kael already, a new, unwelcome layer over the familiar musk that was once my home. "I present to you," Kael's voice rang with a finality that shattered the last of my world, "your new Luna, Celine of the Obsidian Howl Pack. She will stand by my side and ensure the might of our bloodline for generations to come." New Luna. The words were physical blows. Each one landed, stealing the air from my lungs. I wasn't just replaced, I was erased. The quiet, patient Omega who had waited in the wings was now publicly dismissed as irrelevant. The humiliation was a liquid fire in my veins. I could feel their eyes, not with malice, but with a pity that was 1,000 times worse. As the pack's cheers erupted, a sound meant to celebrate a new beginning, I felt something within me, not break, but harden. A cold, clear shell forming around the splintered pieces of my heart. I would not weep here. I would not give them the spectacle of my shattering. With a stillness I did not feel, I turned to leave, and my eyes, sweeping across the joyous, traitorous crowd, caught a pair of eyes watching me from the deepest shadows of the ancient oaks. Not cheering, not even moving, just observing. He was immense, even at a distance, a silhouette of pure, untamed power. His gaze wasn't of pity. It was a scrutiny so intense, so penetrating, I felt he saw past my pain, past my shame, straight into the dormant core of me. A shiver, sharp and electric, traced my spine. Then he was gone, vanished into the forest like a phantom. The walk back to my small cottage was a march through a ghostly version of my life. Every familiar tree, every stone, whispered of memories now poisoned. The cottage, once a sanctuary filled with the phantom echoes of Kael's laughter, was now a tomb of dead hopes. I slid down the door, the weight of my new reality crushing me. I was an Omega, unmated, publicly discarded. In the eyes of the pack, I was now less than nothing, a ghost haunting the edges of a territory that had revoked my right to exist. And my wolf, the part of me that should have raged, should have grieved, remained silent, a profound, terrifying emptiness where a fierce spirit should have been. Was I truly wolfless, or was my wolf simply as broken as the rest of me, too humiliated to even stir? But as the first pale rays of dawn crept through my window, a memory surfaced, stubborn and clear, not of Kael's betrayal, but of those eyes in the shadows, that watchful, powerful gaze. And beneath the crushing despair, a tiny, defiant spark flickered deep within my chest. It was faint, almost imaginary, but it was there, and it was warm. The forest had always been a place of quiet solace for me. Now, as I ventured just beyond the safe, marked paths of the pack territory, it felt like a different beast entirely. This was the true wild, the forbidden fringe where the rules of the pack dissolved into the older, harsher laws of tooth and claw. I shouldn't have been here. An unmated, wolfless Omega was easy prey. Yet I was drawn. The suffocating silence of my cottage, thick with the ghost of Kael's betrayal, was worse than any physical danger. Here, the air was sharp and clean, scented with danger and freedom. And there was another scent, one that had lingered at the edge of my awareness since the clearing. It wasn't Kael's polished cedar, nor Celine's cloying jasmine. This was deeper, the scent of sun-baked rock, of ancient, deep-rooted trees, of storms on the horizon, and underneath it all, a faint, smoky whisper that stirred that strange new warmth inside me. I was being watched. I knew it with a certainty that was bone-deep. The feeling wasn't menacing, not exactly. It was attentive, as if the forest itself held its breath, observing the strange, broken creature that had wandered into its heart. I found the first marker by accident. 3 parallel gashes, brutally deep, carved into the trunk of a lightning-blasted oak. They were fresh, sap still weeping from the wounds like golden tears, and beneath them a symbol, a spiraling, intricate knot that seemed to move if I stared at it too long. It pulsed with a subtle, ancient energy. A warning? A claim? My fingers trembled as I reached out, but I didn't touch it. "You have a curious way of thanking someone for their hospitality." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was low, a rumble that vibrated through the ground and up into the soles of my feet. It wasn't harsh, but it held the gravity of mountains. I spun, my heart leaping into my throat. He emerged from between 2 massive firs, as if he were part of the forest itself. He was even more imposing up close, towering, his frame layered with the hard muscle of a life lived without comfort. His hair, dark as a raven's wing and streaked with silver, was tied back, revealing a face that was a map of survival. A fierce scar cut from his temple to his jaw, pulling slightly at the corner of his mouth. But his eyes, they were the color of molten amber, burning with an intelligence and a wild, untamed power that made Kael's commanding gaze seem like a practiced performance. This was the Watcher from the shadows. I didn't know this was hospitality, I stammered, taking an involuntary step back. The rabbit left on my doorstep, the feeling of being led, not chased. He took a slow step forward, and the world seemed to shrink to the space between us. "This forest is my den. You entered it. I chose not to drive you out." His amber eyes flicked to the mark on the tree, then back to me. "That mark means you have stepped beyond the reach of your former king's fragile authority." "Former king," I echoed, the words bitter. You know of Kale." A shadow, dark and cold, passed over his face. "I know of the boy who plays at being a king while his ancestors' true strength rots in exile." He studied me, his gaze so penetrating I felt utterly transparent. "He called you wolfless, barren. He cast you aside for a glittering trinket from another pack." Each word was a precise, painful truth. Shame heated my cheeks. "He did. He is a fool." The statement was simple, absolute. The wild does not make mistakes, Alara. It only buries treasure deep, waiting for one with the strength to dig. My name in his voice sounded different, not a dismissal, but a recognition. "How do you know my name, Ronan?" He almost smiled, the scar on his face shifting. "The trees whisper, the wind carries stories. The story of the Omega who held a king's heart and the king who was too weak to deserve it is a loud one." He moved closer, and the scent of him, wilderness and ancient secrets, wrapped around me. "My name is Ronan." Ronan. It fit him. Strong, ancient, unyielding. "Why are you here, Ronan? Why show yourself to me?" His molten gaze held mine, and for a moment I saw not a predator, but a lonely sentinel. "Because the silence from within you is not emptiness. It is a slumber, and the forest has grown tired of waiting for you to wake up." He turned then, gesturing for me to follow. "Come. The light is fading, and the deep woods are no place for you tonight, even under my watch." It wasn't an offer. It was a command, but one that held a strange protectiveness. And driven by a fear greater than my fear of him, the fear of returning to my empty, haunted cottage, I followed the scarred sovereign of the wild into the deepening gloom. Ronan's den wasn't a cave of darkness, but a sanctuary carved by time and elemental force. The entrance was hidden behind a waterfall of cascading ivy, opening into a cavern where the air was cool and smelled of clean stone, moss, and the comforting, constant scent of him. A natural fire pit glowed in the center, its light dancing over walls studded with crystals that caught the flames and threw scattered stars across the space. Furs were piled for bedding, and simple, well-made tools hung from hooks. It was austere, but it held a profound sense of peace and immense power. He said little, moving with a silent efficiency that spoke of a lifetime of self-reliance. He offered me water from a spring that trickled down one wall, and a portion of dried meat and wild berries. No grand speeches, no false comfort, just silent, steadfast provision. It was the most honest kindness I'd received in years. "You are safe here," he said finally, his voice a low rumble in the quiet cavern. "But safety is a choice you must remake each dawn. Kale's scouts have sharp noses, and your presence in the wild will not go unnoticed forever." "Why risk it?" I asked, my voice small in the vast space. "Harboring me, it's a challenge to him. You said you know what he is." Ronan's amber eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Kale represents everything the old ways have decayed into: politics over power, alliances over truth. He fears what he cannot put a leash on." He looked directly at me, the fire reflecting in his gaze. "You, Alara, represent something he tried and failed to leash. That makes you interesting. It also makes you a key." "A key to what?" "To a door he has sealed shut, a door behind which the true heart of our kind still beats shut." He stood, his shadow stretching tall against the wall. "Rest. Tomorrow you begin to learn what it means to not just live in the wild, but to belong to it." Sleep came fitfully, but it came, and in my dreams I didn't see Kale's face. I saw a pair of glowing amber eyes watching me from the heart of a great storm. And for the first time, the silent void within me stirred. Not a growl, not a whimper, but a faint, answering pulse of light. The days that followed were a silent, intense education. Ronan was a relentless but patient teacher. He taught me to move without sound, to read the stories bent grass and disturbed soil, to listen to the forest's layered language, the warning shriek of a jay, the anxious chatter of squirrels, the direction of the wind. My senses, once dull and human, began to sharpen. I could smell the rain before the clouds gathered, taste the distant presence of a deer herd on the breeze. He never mentioned my wolf, but his lessons were all about awakening a deeper instinct. One afternoon, by a mirror-still forest pool, he finally spoke of it. "Look," he commanded softly. I knelt beside the water, seeing my own reflection, pale, tired, but with eyes that now held a strange bright flicker within the hazel. And there, just below my ear, was a mark, not a scar, but a delicate, silvery tracery of lines, like the veins of a leaf, or a tiny, elegant version of the spiral knot on the tree. It shimmered faintly in the dappled light. I gasped, my fingers flying to it. It was cool to the touch, but a warmth radiated from it through my skin. What is this? Ronan crouched beside me, his presence a solid warmth at my side. The wild's sigil. It does not appear on skin touched by falsehood or weakness. It is a mark of recognition, of potential. His voice dropped. They told you you were empty. The wild is telling you they lied. Tears, not of sorrow, but of a shocking, profound relief, blurred my vision. For so long I had believed I was broken, a defect. This mark, this tiny, mysterious proof, was a lifeline. The power within you is not wolf as Kale understands it. It is older. It is the pulse of the forest itself. He could not sense it because he only listens for a roar. He does not understand the strength in the deep, quiet root, or the resilience of the seed that waits through the long winter. A sudden, sharp snap of a branch echoed through the clearing. It was too loud, too clumsy to be an animal. Ronan was on his feet in an instant, a silent, powerful barrier between me and the sound. His head tilted, listening. "They are here," he murmured, no fear in his voice, only a cold certainty. Kale's hounds sniffing at the borders of a world they are too tame to comprehend. He turned to me, and in his amber eyes I saw not just a predator, but a general assessing his most vital asset. "The lesson is over, Alara. Now comes the test. Stay behind me. Do not speak. Let the forest and let me do what they must." The air grew heavy, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. The safe, educational world of the past few days shattered. The wild was no longer just a teacher. It was about to become a battlefield. The scent hit me first, not Ronan's deep wilderness, but the familiar, now repulsive mix of polished wolf and pack conformity. It was the smell of my old life, and it came with a wave of nausea. From the dense thicket, 3 warriors from Kale's inner circle emerged. They were betas, faces I recognized, led by a brute named Torin. Their eyes swept over Ronan with wary contempt, then landed on me, widening in disbelief. "The rogue king consorts with cast-offs now?" Torin sneered, though his posture was tense, ready. "Alpha Kale demands the Omega's return. She is still pack property, to be dealt with according to his law." Ronan didn't move, but the air around him seemed to grow denser, colder. "She is under the protection of the Wild Accord, a law your Alpha forgot when he traded his spine for a crown. She is not property. She is a free soul, and you are trespassing." Torin barked a laugh, but it was hollow. "The Wild Accord? Old tales for feral beasts. The only law here is Kale's." His gaze flicked back to me, lingering on the silvery mark now visible on my neck. His sneer faltered, replaced with confusion and a flicker of unease. What is that on her?" Before he could finish, Ronan moved. It wasn't the explosive violence I expected. It was a blur of impossible, graceful speed. He was a shadow, a force of nature. He didn't shift, but the power of the wolf was in every movement. He disarmed the beta to Torin's left with a twist of his wrist, sending the wolf stumbling. He blocked Torin's lunge without seeming to try, his forearm meeting the beta's charge like an iron bar. There was a sickening crack, and Torin fell back with a choked cry. The third warrior hesitated, fear now plain in his eyes. Ronan stood over Torin, his amber eyes blazing with a quiet, terrifying fury. "Tell your king," Ronan's voice was a low, earth-shaking growl, "that the next wolf he sends into my territory will not return with just broken bones. Alara is under my protection. This land is under my sovereignty. His reign ends at the edge of the trees he is too afraid to truly know." He stepped back, the implicit threat hanging in the air. The two conscious betas scrambled to drag the groaning Torin to his feet, their bravado utterly shattered. They vanished into the foliage, leaving behind only the scent of their fear and the heavy silence of the forest. Ronan turned to me. His breathing was steady, his expression unreadable. "Are you unharmed?" I could only nod, my own heart hammering. I had just witnessed a demonstration of pure, untamed power that made Kale's displays of strength look like theatrical performances. But more than that, I had heard Ronan's words. My protection, my sovereignty. He had declared a war, not for territory, but for me. "They saw the mark," I whispered, my hand going to my neck. "What will Kale do?" "What weak men always do when faced with true power," Ronan said, his gaze turning towards the direction of the Silver Fang lands. "He will first deny it, then he will fear it, and finally he will try to destroy it." He looked back at me, and his eyes held a new intensity. "The time for quiet learning is over, Alara. You must awaken the strength the wild has recognized in you, not for battle, but for truth. Your truth is a weapon he cannot defend against." That night, back in the safety of the den, the reality settled upon me. There was no going back. Kale knew I was here, with Ronan. I was no longer a discarded memory. I was a living challenge to his authority. The spark within me, fanned by Ronan's words and the day's violence, burned brighter. The silent void was gone. In its place was a hum, a resonance like the deep, quiet note of a struck crystal. It wasn't a wolf's growl. It was something deeper, older, the sound of roots stirring in spring. Ronan sat across the fire, sharpening a blade with a steady, rhythmic scrape. "He will come himself next time. He will bring his new Luna to show his strength. He will try to make you see your choice as a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said, the conviction in my own voice surprising me. He looked up, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "No, it is not, but believing it and proving it are two different trials. When he comes, you must stand not behind me, but beside me. You must show him and yourself what the quiet Omega truly holds inside." The challenge was immense, to stand before Kale, before the entire pack that had witnessed my humiliation, and show them something they had all declared did not exist. The fear was cold, but the humming warmth in my core was hotter. I thought of Celine's triumphant gaze, of Kale's dismissive eyes, and for the first time, the thought of facing them didn't fill me with dread, but with a fierce, rising certainty. "Teach me," I said to Ronan. He nodded, a slow, solemn gesture. "Tomorrow we begin." My training with Ronan shifted. It was no longer just about stealth and survival. It became a deep, often wordless communion with the forest, a deliberate awakening of the power the wild signal represented. We would stand in a sun-dappled glade, and he would have me close my eyes. Listen not with your ears, but with your spirit, his voice would instruct, a calm anchor. Feel the life in the soil, the push of the sap in the trees, the slow, patient breath of the stone. At first, I felt nothing but my own frustration. Then, slowly, sensations began to filter through. A faint rhythmic pulse under my feet, like a great sleeping heart, a gentle pull, as if the oldest trees were whispering secrets on a frequency only my bones could hear. The silvery mark on my neck would grow warm, a comforting guide. One evening, he took me to the base of the great sentinel, an oak so ancient its trunk was wider than my cottage. "Touch it," Ronan said. "Ask it for its strength." It sounded like madness, but I placed my palms on the rough, mossy bark, closed my eyes, and asked, not with words, but with a feeling, a yearning for the steadfastness this tree had witnessed for centuries. A surge of energy, vast and slow and deeply peaceful, flowed into me. It wasn't violent or overwhelming. It was the feeling of deep roots, of unshakable stability, of time itself. My knees didn't buckle. They felt planted. When I opened my eyes, Ronan was watching me, a look of profound satisfaction on his scarred face. Kale, enraged, lunged directly for me, bypassing Ronan. His eyes were filled with a fury that was personal, venomous. This was about more than reclaiming property. It was about erasing the living proof of his mistake. Fear spiked, cold and sharp. But as the great silver wolf leapt, time seemed to slow. The humming warmth inside me didn't flare into anger, but into a profound, crystalline clarity. I didn't see an alpha. I saw a frightened boy clinging to a fake crown. I didn't move to fight. I raised my hand, palm out, towards him. I didn't command the forest. I connected with it. I felt the roots under my feet, the sap in the trees, the very air. I poured my will, not a will to harm, but a will to reveal, to stop, into that connection. The ground between Kyle and me didn't erupt. It responded. Thick, woody vines, thorny and strong, shot up from the soil, not with violence, but with a swift, inevitable growth, weaving themselves into a dense, living barrier inches from my outstretched hand. Kyle crashed into it, snarling in shock and confusion, tangled in a net of living wood that hadn't been. "You see," he murmured, "your power is not to dominate, but to connect, to draw strength from the true, ancient world Kyle has walled himself away from." He began to share pieces of his own past, not in long stories, but in fragments offered like rare gifts. He spoke of a lineage called the Guardian Kings, rulers who were not overlords, but stewards, their power a symbiotic bond with the land. He spoke of a betrayal generations ago, a coup by a rival line, hungry for control, Kyle's ancestors. The Guardian bloodline was purged, hunted, their history rewritten as savage legend. Ronan was the last. "They call me rogue, feral," he said one night, staring into the eternal flame of the fire pit. "They are right, in a way. I am feral to their cages. I am rogue to their corrupt laws. My scars are not just from claws, Elara. They are from the teeth of their lies." Understanding dawned, cold and clear. My rejection wasn't just a personal betrayal by Kyle. It was part of a centuries-old pattern. He had discarded me because I represented a connection to something older and truer that his dynasty had spent generations trying to erase. My supposed wolflessness wasn't a defect. It was a different kind of power, one his bloodline was literally bred not to see. This revelation didn't anger me. It freed me. My pain was not my fault. It was the symptom of a deeper sickness in the pack. "Why show me this?" I asked him. "Why trust me with your history, your truth?" Ronan was silent for a long time. "Because the wild chose you," he said finally, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "And because when I look at you, I do not see the ghost of the Omega they broke. I see the first flicker of the queen who can help heal the world they fractured. Queen. The word hung in the air between us, immense and terrifying. It had nothing to do with thrones or crowns. It spoke of responsibility, of a strength that nurtured and protected. It felt true in a way Kyle title for Celine never had. Our connection deepened into a quiet, unshakable partnership. We communicated with glances, with shared silences that were more eloquent than speeches. A profound respect grew, a recognition of two damaged souls who had found in the wild and in each other a purpose that transcended their past suffering. He was my anchor, my guide, the keeper of forgotten truths. I was his reminder that those truths could still take root and grow. One afternoon, as we gathered herbs by a stream, Ronan went still, his head lifting like a stag catching a dangerous scent. His expression turned to granite. They are coming. Not scouts, the whole pack. He brings his court to witness his victory. The humming warmth inside me didn't falter. It solidified into a core of calm determination. I looked at Ronan, and for the first time, I didn't just see my protector. I saw my ally, my equal in the coming storm. Then let them witness, I said, my voice steady. Let them see what grows in the shadows they were too proud to explore. Ronan's amber eyes blazed with a fierce pride. He reached out, not to take my hand, but to place his over the sigil on my neck. A surge of energy passed between us, not a spark of passion, but a merging of purpose, the deep, ancient strength of the guardian meeting the bright, awakening power of the lost queen. Stand with me, Alara. His voice was a vow. I will, I answered, the promise binding my soul to his and to the wild we were both sworn to defend. The forest itself seemed to prepare for the confrontation. The usual chorus of birds and insects fell silent. The wind died down, leaving an oppressive, waiting stillness. Ronan and I took our position in a clearing not far from his den, a natural amphitheater where the trees formed a silent, judging gallery. They arrived not with stealth, but with pomp. Kyle led them, striding into the clearing with Celine at his side, a vision of cold beauty and calculated power. Behind them flowed what seemed like the entire Silver Fang pack, their faces a mix of curiosity, aggression, and for some of the older ones, a strange, uneasy awe as they looked upon Ronan. Kyle's eyes, hard and glittering, swept over Ronan with disdain before landing on me. I saw the shock first, the visible change in me, the straightness of my spine, the calm in my gaze. Then came the anger, hot and possessive, as he saw the silvery sigil gleaming on my skin. So the rumors are true. The Silver Fang pack collects my discarded scraps. Alara, this farce ends now. You will return to the pack and face the judgments you fled. I took a step forward, placing myself not behind Ronan, but squarely beside him. The action sent a ripple through the watching pack. I fled no judgments, Kyle. I walked away from a lie. Your judgment holds no power over me here. Celine let out a derisive laugh. Listen to the wolfless creature trying to borrow the courage of the rogue. You have no place here. You are an emptiness, a flaw. Kyle was merciful to let you stay as long as he did. Ronan spoke then, his voice a low, resonant counterpoint to their shrillness. She is wolfless only to those whose senses are dulled by arrogance. She carries the wild sigil, a mark your bloodline, Kyle, lost the ability to see when your ancestors traded wisdom for a stolen throne. A murmur, confused and tense, went through the pack. Kyle's face darkened. Ancient superstition, you cling to dead stories to justify your savagery. She is an Omega, my Omega, and I'm reclaiming what is mine. He shifted then, a display of raw power, transforming into a massive, sleek silver wolf. It was a command, a threat. Celine shifted beside him, a smaller, darker shadow. Several of the pack's warriors followed suit, a wall of snapping jaws and bristling fur. Ronan didn't shift. He simply stood, a mountain in human form, but the power radiating from him was palpable, a pressure in the air that made the advancing wolves hesitate. "You claim what you think you own," Ronan growled, the sounds echoing with ancient authority. "I protect what the wild has claimed as its own. You will not touch her." The battle was chaos. Ronan was a tempest, a whirlwind of controlled, devastating force. He moved between the wolves, a blur of motion, disarming, disabling, never killing, but making his absolute dominance clear. He was protecting, not attacking. Then silence fell, absolute and stunned. Every wolf, every shifter froze. They stared at the impossible wall of greenery, at me standing calmly behind it, my hands still raised, the sigil on my neck glowing with a soft silver light. I looked past the thrashing Kyle, my gaze finding the pack. I saw their faces, the disbelief, the fear, and in some, a dawning, awestruck recognition. I saw Celine, her confident sneer replaced by open-mouthed shock. "I am not Wolfless Omega," I said, my voice ringing in the quiet. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of the truth I now fully embodied. My power is not of tooth and claw, forged for domination. It is of root and branch, meant for guardianship. This, I gestured to the vibrant living wall, is what Kyle and his line have forgotten. This is the true strength they called emptiness. I lowered my hand. The vines, as if sensing the shift, slowly began to recede back into the earth, leaving Kyle disheveled and panting in human form on the ground, his aura of invincibility shattered. Ronan stepped to my side, his gaze sweeping over the defeated Alpha and the humbled pack. "The guardian lineage is not extinct," he declared, his voice the final verdict. "And its queen has awakened. The wild has remembered its sovereigns. The question now is, will you remember your true allegiance?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned, and with a last protective glance at me, began to walk back towards the deep forest. The message was clear. The audience was over. I took one last look at the clearing, at Kyle's humiliation, at Celine's shattered pride, at the pack's confused awe, and then I turned and followed Ronan, not as a rescued captive, but as a queen returning to her kingdom. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time in my life, I walked it without fear, my steps sure beside the king who had shown me my own crown. The deep woods after the confrontation felt different. It was no longer just Ronan's territory or my refuge. It had become ours, a sovereign land born from defiance and truth. The energy in the air hummed with a new potential, a quiet celebration. Word, carried by the wind and whispered by leaves, spread faster than any scout. The story of the wolfless Omega, who had commanded the forest itself, spread through the fringe dwellers, the disillusioned, the ones who felt the sickness in Kyle's rigid rule. They came in trickles at first, a lone, aging warrior who remembered stories of the guardian kings from his grandfather, a young Omega, scorned for being too gentle, a family of trackers who felt the land itself groaning under Kyle's expansionist policies. They didn't come to swear fealty to a throne, but to seek sanctuary, to learn the old ways Ronan embodied. Ardennes became a heartstone. Ronan taught the practical arts of the deep wild, tracking, healing with herbs, reading the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. I found my role not in commanding, but in guiding. I would sit with the frightened Omega Lyra and simply listen to the wind with her, helping her find the quiet song of her own spirit. I would walk with the old warrior, Boren, and he would point out plants whose uses had been forgotten by the pack, his eyes bright with the joy of remembered knowledge. My own power, the connection to the living world, was not something I could directly teach, but I could foster it. In a quiet grove, I would have them sit, place their hands on the earth, and just feel. For some, nothing happened. For others, a flicker of recognition, a warmth, a sense of peace they'd never known. It was a slow, gentle awakening, the opposite of Kael's forced hierarchy. One evening, as we sat around a communal fire, Ronan, myself, Boren, Lyra, and a few others, Lyra spoke up, her voice shy. "Alara, what you did in the clearing, with the vines, can we learn to do that?" All eyes turned to me, filled with a hopeful curiosity. I shook my head gently. "I don't think it's something to be learned like a skill. It's a relationship. The sigil," I touched my neck, "is like a key, but the lock is in here." I placed a hand over my heart. "It's about listening, not commanding. The wild doesn't obey. It cooperates when you trust its intent." Ronan nodded in his low rumble. "Kael's power demands submission. The true power of the Guardians asks for understanding. Alara's strength is in her clarity of purpose. She asked the forest to protect, not to attack, and it answered." Boren stroked his beard, his eyes wise. "A different kind of alpha. A Luna not of the pack, but of the place. The land itself chooses to follow her." The concept was revolutionary. Here, leadership wasn't about being the strongest fighter, but about being the clearest channel for the well-being of the whole, the people, the animals, the forest itself. Ronan was the steadfast mountain, the unbreakable will. I was the connecting river, the nurturing soil. Together, we weren't just rulers, we were stewards. News from the Silver Fang territory was scarce but telling. Kael had retreated into his citadel, his pride wounded, his authority cracked. Celine's influence waned as the pack grappled with the seismic shift in their worldview. Whispers of the Forest Queen and the Last Guardian became a forbidden, tantalizing legend among the common pack members. A few more brave souls, smelling the change in the wind, slipped away from Kael's lands to seek us out. One such arrival was a beta named Fenrir. He was not gentle like Lyra or wise like Boren. He was all sharp angles and simmering anger, a skilled warrior who had been passed over for promotion because he questioned Kael's strategies. He bowed stiffly to Ronan, then his sharp eyes landed on me, scrutinizing, doubtful. "So you're the one who grew a wall," he said, his tone not quite disrespectful but challenging. "Can you grow a fortress? Kael is humiliated, not defeated. He will regroup. He will come back with fire and steel to burn what he cannot control." His words were a cold splash of reality. Our sanctuary was built on a moral victory, but Kael's world operated on a different currency, force. Ronan met Fenrir's gaze. "We do not build fortresses. We become the forest. A fire can burn a tree, but it cannot burn the idea of the forest. It cannot burn the seed waiting in the ash." Fenrir looked unconvinced. "Ideas don't stop claws." "No," I said, stepping forward. My voice was calm. "Fenrir, why did you come here? For a stronger fortress than Kael's, or for a different truth to fight for?" He was silent for a long moment, his internal battle plain on his face. Finally, he grunted. "I came because the air in his pack smells of rot. I came because I heard a queen can make vines grow from nothing. I want to see if that truth is stronger than his lies." "Then stay," Ronan said, "and learn the difference between fighting for land and fighting for what makes the land worth living on." Fenrir's integration was our next test. Could this new way of being hold someone forged in the old ways of conflict? It was a microcosm of the greater challenge to come. As the community grew, so did its complexities. But with each challenge, the bond between Ronan and I deepened, a silent, seamless partnership where his strength of arms and my strength of spirit became two sides of the same shield, protecting the fragile, beautiful sanctuary we were building from the roots up. Ronan and I made our way to a high vantage point overlooking the creek. Through the lattice of leaves, we watched. The iron-toothed scouts were big, clad in leather reinforced with dull metal plates. They moved with a confident brutality, hacking at inconvenient branches, their noise an insult to the quiet woods. Then the forest began to resist. A vine stirred by a wind that touched nothing else snagged the leader's axe. A previously solid-looking patch of ground gave way to soft, sucking mud. Distant, unnatural animal cries, orchestrated by our people, made them jumpy and turn their backs to the real threats, Fenrir's team, who were shadows among shadows. Within an hour, the scouts were arguing, disoriented, their confidence eroded. Finally, they turned back, muttering about cursed woods and witchcraft. They hadn't seen a single enemy, but they had been utterly defeated. As they retreated, Ronan let out a slow breath. The first test, and the forest answered. But I felt a deep unease. They felt the resistance, Ronan. They'll report it. Kale and the Iron-Tooth Alpha will know their simple invasion won't work. They'll change tactics. They'll bring more. They'll bring fire. He placed a steadying hand on my arm. Then we will be ready for that too. You have given us eyes and ears no scout can evade. That is our greatest advantage. We returned to the heart of the sanctuary. The news of the repelled scouts without a fight spread, bolstering morale. The community saw that our way, the way of wisdom and unity with the land, could be a shield. That night, as we reviewed the sentry rotations, Lyra approached me, her eyes wide. "Ilada, when you sense them, what does it feel like, the Iron Tooth?" I thought of the cold, deadening sensation. It feels like the opposite of life, like a place where nothing wants to grow, where the song of the world is silenced. She shuddered. Then we can't let them in, ever. Her simple conviction mirrored my own, but the cost of keeping them out was becoming clear. The vigilance was a constant drain on me. The peaceful communion I loved was now laced with the tension of a sentry on watch. Ronan, too, bore the weight, the lines on his scarred face seeming deeper as he planned for scenarios we both hoped would never come. We stood together later, looking out over our sleeping sanctuary, the softly glowing fungal lights, the quiet forms in sheltered nooks. "We have asked them to trust in something fragile," I murmured. "We have asked them to trust in something real," Ronan corrected gently. "More real than Kale's crown or the Iron-Tooth steel. We have asked them to trust in the ancient, enduring truth of life itself. That is not fragile, Ilada. It is the most resilient force in this world. It waits in the seed. It persists in the root. It returns after every fire." He was right, but as I felt the distant, gathering chill on the edge of my awareness, like a storm front still days away, I knew the fire was coming, and we would soon learn just how resilient our roots truly were. The cold spot on my mental map didn't just linger, it swelled. It became a spreading stain, a numbness creeping westward. The Iron-Tooth host was on the move, a disciplined, grinding machine of men, wolves, and wagons bearing the tools of destruction. And intertwined with that cold, I felt the hotter, more erratic pulse of Kale's forces, smaller, but fueled with a volatile mix of wounded pride and desperate purpose. They were 2 days out, then 1. The sanctuary was a coiled spring. All non-essential items were hidden in deep stone crevices. The very young, old, and infirm were guided to the most remote defensible cave system, the root hold, we called it. The rest of us took our positions. Fenrir and his best fighters were our mobile response, hidden along the most likely approaches. Boren and his apprentices prepared stations with medicinal supplies and those disorienting smokes. Lyra and others like her were messengers and runners, knowing the hidden trails blindfolded. Ronan and I took station at the Whispering Ridge, the highest point in our territory, a place of wind-swept stone that acted as a natural amplifier for my senses. From here, I could feel the entire web. I was the spider at the center, feeling every tremor in the strands. "They've stopped at the Silver Run River," I said, my eyes closed, my voice thin with concentration. "The main host. They're making camp, but a smaller group, Kale's group. They've split off. They're coming faster, along the ravine path." Ronan's jaw tightened. He's impatient. He wants to claim the first blow for himself, to prove his worth to his mercenary allies. Arrogant to the end. He gave a series of sharp whistles, redirecting Fenrir's team to intercept the ravine approach. The first clash came at dawn. It wasn't with the main force, but with Kale's vanguard. We felt it more than heard it, a violent ripple in the forest's peace. Through my connection, I sensed the shock and fury as Fenrir's team used the terrain perfectly. Falling logs redirected by clever lever systems, swarms of stinging insects stirred from their nests, sudden confusing fog from heated stones dropped into the ravine stream. Kale's warriors, expecting a straight fight, were thrown into chaos. But Kale himself was a vortex of anger. I felt his power, a distorted, shouting version of what it once was, pushing through the confusion. He broke Fenrir's line, charging forward with a core of his most loyal guards, heading straight for the heart of the sanctuary, for the Whispering Ridge, for us. "He's coming," I said, opening my eyes to meet Ronan's. "He's chosen his path." Ronan nodded, a calm settling over him, the calm of the mountain before the storm. "Then we meet him on it. This ends today." We descended from the ridge, meeting Kale in the Grove of Ancestors, a circle of the oldest, most majestic trees in the forest. It was a sacred place, and his desecrating it with his anger felt like the final, unforgivable sin. He emerged from the trees, breathing heavily, his clothes torn from Fenrir's traps, his eyes wild. Celine was not with him. His guard fanned out behind him, looking wary of the very air. "Enough tricks," Kale roared, his voice cracking. "Enough hiding behind leaves and shadows. Face me, rogue, or are you and your witch only brave when you can cheat?" Ronan stepped forward, a study in controlled power. "There is no cheating in survival, Kale. Only wisdom and foolishness. You have chosen foolishness again." With a scream of rage, Kale shifted and lunged. Ronan met him, not as a wolf, but as the guardian. He shifted in a blast of brilliant tawny fur and powerful muscle, a wolf unlike any I'd ever seen. Larger, his fur marked with patterns like ancient runes, his eyes burning amber fire. The clash was titanic, a whirl of fur, tooth, and raw clashing wills. I wanted to help, to intervene, but I knew this was Ronan's fight. For his lineage, for his truth. My fight was different. I turned my attention outward, to the cold stain that was now on the move again. The main Iron-Tooth host was advancing. They would be here within an hour. I reached out, not to the trees for strength, but to the memory in the land, to the deep, slow patience of the stone, to the relentless push of the groundwater. I poured my will, my love for this place, my desperate need to protect it, into that connection. I didn't ask for vines or walls. I asked for the forest to remember its own sovereignty. In the circle, Ronan had gained the upper hand. He was older, wiser, his strength forged in truth, not insecurity. With a mighty twist, he had Kyle pinned, his jaws at the defeated Alpha's throat. Kyle shifted back to human form, panting, bleeding, all his pride gone, replaced by hollow, staring defeat. "Finish it," he whispered, the words a death rattle of his old self. Ronan shifted back, standing over him. "Killing you would only make you a martyr for a lie I intend to erase," Ronan said, his voice echoing with finality. "You are broken. You are nothing. Go back to your empty throne and your hired blades. Tell them the guardian king still walks these woods, and his queen commands them to leave." At that moment, a distant roar echoed through the trees, not of wolves, but of machinery, the grinding shriek of metal on wood. The iron tooth had arrived at the border, and they had begun to cut. Kyle's eyes met mine, and in them I saw a pathetic spark of triumph. "You may have beaten me," they seemed to say, "but they will destroy everything you love." Ronan hauled him to his feet and shoved him towards his cowed guards. "Take them, go." As Kyle was dragged away, a broken specter, I turned my full consciousness to the eastern front. The cold was here, the axes were biting, and I could feel the ancient trees screaming in a silence only I could hear. My moment had come, not to fight with tooth and claw, but to defend with the very soul of the land. I knelt, placing both palms on the sacred soil of the grove, closed my eyes, and gave myself over completely to the web of life I had spent weeks weaving. I became the forest, and the forest would answer. The world dissolved into a torrent of sensation. I was no longer a Lara in a grove. I was the aching cut in the bark of a 1,000-year-old cedar. I was the panicked scurry of creatures fleeing the metallic thunder. I was the deep, furious tremor in the roots as the earth was torn by strange, rolling machines. The cold, sharp intent of the iron tooth was a poison spreading through my veins. But I was also the memory of sun on leaves, the patient strength of granite, the secret, resilient life in the deepest humus. I was the interconnected whole, and the poison was an affront to my entire being. I did not attack, I redirected. I pulled on the network of roots, guiding them not to erupt violently, but to subtly shift. The ground beneath the lead logging machine softened into a bog, the great metal wheels sinking with a groaning protest. I urged the streams to change their course, just slightly, flooding the area where they tried to stack the felled timber. For the soldiers themselves, I worked through subtler means. I amplified the forest's natural disorientation. Shadows lengthened and twisted unnaturally. Familiar sounds, the call of a companion, the crunch of a footstep, seemed to come from the wrong direction. The very air grew heavy, thick with the sense of damp earth and a strange, soporific pollen released by flowers Boren had cultivated for this purpose. The iron-toothed wolves, used to clear lines of sight and straightforward brutality, began to falter, to argue, to feel a creeping, superstitious dread. But their alpha, a brute named Mordrak, was made of sterner, colder stuff. He felt the resistance and saw it not as magic, but as a challenge to his will. He rallied his core warriors, men and wolves whose minds were as hard as their tools. "Sorcery!" he bellowed, his voice like grinding stones. "Burn it out! If the trees fight, burn them all!" I felt the shift in intent before I saw the flames. The cold numbness of their presence suddenly spiked with a hungry, devouring heat. Torches were lit, vats of pitch were brought forward. Panic, sharp and primal, shot through me, through the forest. Fire was the one thing the deep woods could not easily withstand. It was the great eraser. Through our bond, I felt Ronan's surge of alarm. He was sprinting towards the eastern front, Fenrir and others at his heels. But they were too far. The first arc of flaming pitch sailed through the air, landing in a dry thicket of brush. Orange and yellow tendrils leapt to life, their crackle a sound of pure horror. No. The word was not a thought, but a command from the very core of my spirit, echoed by every living thing connected to me. It was a refusal so absolute it vibrated through the ley lines of the land. And the land answered. Not with growth, but with summoning. From the highest ridge, where the air was thin and cold, a bank of thick gray cloud that had lingered innocently all day began to churn and descend. It rolled down the slopes like a silent, living avalanche, not of snow, but of dense, wet mist. It flowed into the valley, swallowing the rising flames. The fire hissed and sputtered, starved of air, drowned in an impossible, localized fog. The torches in the iron-toothed soldiers' hands guttered and died. In moments, the entire advancing front was shrouded in a blinding, cool gray blanket. The roaring heat was replaced by a damp, unquieting chill. Within the fog, confusion became terror. Men shouted, unable to see their own hands. Wolves whined, their senses scrambled. The orderly advance dissolved into a chaos of stumbling bodies and crashing equipment. On the edge of the fog, Ronan and Fenrir's team arrived. They didn't charge in, they simply stood, silent specters at the edge of the unnatural mist, their forms half visible. Ronan's voice, amplified by the stone of the ridge and the strange acoustics of the fog, boomed out, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "The forest has spoken. Your fire is ash. Your steel is blind. Leave this place. Carry the warning to all who would bring death to the living world. The guardians are awakened. The heartwood stands."
It was not a threat of violence, but a statement of immutable fact. The impossible fog, the failed fire, the very ground that seemed to rebel, it was too much for even Mordrak's iron will. Superstition overcame greed. A retreat was sounded, an ordinor or polite. A retreat was sounded, an ordinary, fearful scramble back the way they had come, leaving their stuck machinery and their shattered confidence. As the last of the cold, sharp intent receded from the edge of my awareness, the fog slowly, gently, began to lift, dissipating into the afternoon sun, as if it had never been. The forest was scarred, cut trees, torn earth, but it was alive. The vital song continued, stronger for the victory. The effort left me utterly spent. I slumped forward on the grove's soil, my connection snapping back to the confines of my own frail body. I was drained, hollow, every muscle trembling. Strong arms caught me before I fell. Ronan. He gathered me up, his face etched with concern, and in awe so deep it was reverence. "Ilara," he breathed, holding me close. "What you did?" "The forests did it," I whispered, my voice raw. "I just asked." He carried me back to the sanctuary, to the comforting darkness of our den. The community gathered, their faces pale with the aftermath of fear, now shining with a triumphant, disbelieving joy. They had witnessed a miracle, not of destruction, but of profound, majestic protection.
As Ronan tended to me, giving me water and wrapping me in warm furs, Lyra approached, tears in her eyes. "You saved it all," she said. I shook my head weakly, looking at Ronan, then at the faces of Boren, Fenrir, all of them. We saved it, the roots and the runners, the stone and the stream, the guardian and the gardener. I managed a faint smile. We saved it together. Fenrir, his usual skepticism utterly vaporized, knelt by the fire, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer. I have never seen such power. Not power over, power with. I fought for many alphas. Today, for the first time, I fought for something, not because I was ordered, but because I believed. He looked at me, then at Ronan, and gave a slow, solemn nod. It was the truest oath he could have given. Exhaustion pulled me under, but as I drifted, I felt it. The deep, contented hum of the forest, safe and whole. And woven into that hum, stronger than ever, was the steady, protective frequency of Ronan's presence beside me. The battle was won. The war, for now, was over. And in the quiet that followed the storm, our sanctuary wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was a legend, and we were its keepers. Peace, after the storm, was not the quiet that had come before. It was a vibrant, humming stillness, filled with the profound gratitude of life that has been defended and spared. The scarred land began to heal, and we helped it. Saplings were tenderly planted where ancient ones had fallen. The diverted streams were guided back to their courses, singing clearer than ever. The story of what happened at the Whispering Ridge and the eastern border didn't just spread, it transformed. It became a saga carried by traders, by wanderers, by the very wind. The tale of the last guardian king and the forest queen who commanded the mist and spoke for the trees. Kale's Silverfang pack, already crumbling from within after his humiliating return, began to dissolve. In twos and threes, then in families and small groups, they came, not as conquerors, but as supplicants, their heads bowed, seeking the truth they had been denied. We did not turn them away, but entry into the sanctuary, now becoming known as the Verdant Covenant, was not a right, it was an earned privilege. Ronan and I, with Boren's wisdom and Fenrir's pragmatic discipline, established a simple code: respect for all life, contribution to the whole, and a willingness to learn the old ways. Those who came with arrogance or the old habits of dominance were gently but firmly guided to a period of solitary reflection at the borders, to listen to the forest until their hearts softened. Lyra blossomed into a gifted healer, her gentle spirit now underpinned by a steely confidence. Boren became our lore master, teaching the children and new arrivals the histories Ronan had preserved, the true histories. Fenrir, to everyone's surprise, including his own, found his calling not as a warlord, but as the master of the Sentinel Guild, training protectors who saw their role as shields for the community in the forest, not as weapons for aggression. Ronan and I ruled, but the word no longer fit. We guided. We served as the connective tissue between the people and the land. Our bond was the bedrock upon which the covenant was built. It was a partnership of equals, a silent conversation that needed no words, a shared purpose that was our breath and our heartbeat. He was my strength when the burdens of leadership grew heavy. I was his reminder of the gentle, nurturing power that made strength worthwhile. Seasons turned. The verdant covenant thrived, not as a sprawling city, but as a network of harmonious clearings, tree dwellings, and sacred groves, all living in subtle balance with the wild. We became a beacon, a living proof that there was a different way to be. One spring morning, on the anniversary of the Great Stand against the Iron Tooth, the entire covenant gathered in the grove of ancestors, now more lush and vibrant than ever. A ceremony of renewal was about to begin, but as Ronan stood to speak, a ripple of movement came from the tree line. Through the crowd walked a lone, familiar figure. His silver hair was unkempt, his fine clothes replaced with simple traveler's leathers. It was Kale, but the arrogant alpha was gone. In his place was a man hollowed out by regret, his eyes clear for the first time, holding only a profound, weary sorrow. The crowd fell utterly silent. Fenrir's hand went to his knife, but Ronan raised his own, a gesture of peace. Kale stopped before the dais where we stood. He did not look at Ronan, he only looked at me, and then his gaze dropped to the ground. Elara, Ronan, people of the covenant, I come with no title, I bring no pack. I am a man who spent his life building on sand, defending a lie, and breaking the most precious thing ever offered to him. He finally lifted his eyes to mine, and they were swimming with tears. I have walked the wild alone for a year. I have listened to the trees you taught me were silent. I have felt the pulse of the earth you showed me was dead. I was blind, and in my blindness I caused deep pain. He knelt then, not a posture of submission to authority, but of humility before truth. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not ask for a place. I ask only for the chance to learn, to spend whatever life I have left trying to understand the truth I spent so long fighting, to serve this place in any small way as penance. The silence stretched. Every eye was on me. This was the man who had shattered my world, who had brought fire and steel to my doorstep. The old hurt was a faint echo. What I felt now was a deep, overwhelming pity and a quiet sense of completion. I looked at Ronan. In his amber eyes, I saw no anger, but a calm assessment. He gave a slight, imperceptible nod. The choice was mine. I stepped down from the dais and walked to where Kale knelt. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, as if expecting a blow. The greatest strength, I said softly, so only he and the closest could hear, is not in never falling, Kale. It is in having the courage to rise from the ruins of what you were and choose to build something true. I looked at Boren, who nodded solemnly. Boren will guide you. The path of learning is long, and it starts with listening. A collective, soft sigh of release went through the covenant. It was an act of mercy that solidified our philosophy more than any victory in battle ever could. The ceremony continued. As the sun reached its zenith, Ronan and I stood together before our people. He spoke of resilience. I spoke of connection. And as we finished, a phenomenon occurred that none could explain but all felt in their souls.
Every flower in the grove, the moonblooms, the star veils, the humble forest daisies, slowly turned its face towards us and towards each other, as if in a silent, joyful salute. The very air glittered with drifting pollen that shone like gold dust in the sunbeams. It was the forest's blessing, the land's joyful yes. Later, as the celebration feasted and sang, Ronan and I slipped away to the Whispering Ridge. The view of the thriving, peaceful territory below was our greatest reward. "You showed him mercy," Ronan said, his voice full of pride. "I taught you that true power protects, even from itself," I replied, leaning into his solid, steady presence. "The cycle is complete. The lie is healed." He took my hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with mine. It was a gesture of partnership, of a bond deeper than any mate mark, forged in trials and tempered in peace. "It's only the beginning, Ilara. The song we started here, it will spread. The seed of this truth will travel on the wind." I looked out at the horizon, at the world beyond our woods. Once it had been a place of fear and exile. Now it was a canvas of possibility. We had not built an empire, we had planted a garden, and from its soil a new, kinder world could grow. "Then let it spread," I said, my heart full to bursting with a quiet, fierce joy. "Let the song of the root and the crown be heard everywhere. Our story isn't over, Ronan. It's just found its true beginning." And under the watchful, loving eyes of the ancient stars, in the heart of the wild that had saved us both, the guardian king and the forest queen stood together, their hands joined, ready for all the peaceful dawns to come. The lost had been found, the silent had found their voice, and in the space meant for breaking, they had built a forever.